Chapter 38. Stanley took hold of Zero's forearms and pulled him upright. Then he stooped down and let Zero fall over his right shoulder. He stood up, lifting Zero's worn-out body off the ground. He left the shovel and the sack of jars behind him as he continued up the mountain. Zero's legs dangled in front of him. Stanley couldn't see his feet, which made it difficult to walk through the tangled patches of weeds and vines. He concentrated on one step at a time, carefully raising and setting down each foot. He thought only about each step, not the impossible task that lay before him. Higher and higher he climbed. His strength came from somewhere deep inside of himself and also seemed to come from the outside as well. After focusing on the big thumb for so long, it was as if the rock had absorbed his energy and was now acting like a giant kind of magnet, pulling him toward it. After a while, he became aware of a foul odor. At first he thought it was coming from Zero, but it seemed to be in the air, hanging all around him. He also noticed that the ground wasn't steep anymore. As the ground flattened, a huge stone precipice rose up ahead of him, just barely visible in the moonlight. It seemed to grow bigger and bigger with each step he took. It no longer resembled a thumb. He knew he'd never be able to climb it. Around him, the smell became stronger. It was the bitter smell of despair. Even if he somehow was able to climb the big thumb, he knew he wouldn't find water. How could there be water at the top of a giant rock? The weeds and bugs had survived only by an occasional rainstorm, which he had seen from camp. Still, he continued toward it. If nothing else, he wanted to at least reach the thumb. He never made it, though. His feet slipped out from underneath him. Zero's head knocked against the back of his shoulder as he fell and tumbled into a small, muddy gully. As he lay face down in the muddy ditch, he didn't even know if he'd ever get up again. He didn't even know if he'd try. He had come all this way just to... You need water to make mud. He crawled along the gully in the direction that seemed to be the muddiest. The ground became gloppier, the mud splashed up, and he slapped the ground. Using both hands, he dug a hole in the soggy soil. It was too dark to see, but he thought he could feel a tiny pool of water at the bottom of his hole. He stuck his head in the hole and licked the dirt. He dug deeper, and as he did so, more water seemed to fill the hole. He couldn't see it, but he could feel it, first with his fingers, then with his tongue. He dug until he had a hole that was about as deep as his arm was long, and there was enough water in it to scoop out with his hands and drop onto Zero's face. Zero's eyes remained closed, but his tongue poked out between his lips, searching out the droplets. Stanley dragged Zero closer to the hole. He dug, then scooped some more water, and then let it pour out of his hands right into Zero's mouth. As he continued to widen his hole, his hands came across a smooth, round object. It was too smooth and too round to be a rock. He wiped the dirt off of it and realized that it was an onion. He bit into it without peeling it. The hot, bitter juice burst into his mouth, and he could feel it all the way up to his eyes. And when he swallowed, he felt the warmth all the way down into his throat and into his stomach. He only ate half. He gave the other half to Zero. Here, eat this. What is it? Zero whispered. A hot fudge sundae.